All right, guys, welcome to the next episode of the Misfits Podcast. And I have some sad news. A member of our little podcast is not with us today, and that is Manus. Manus is doing rural immersion. Yeah, so he's having
Yeah.
a great time. Yeah, in Emerald, doing rural things without us. So me and Raymond are holding down the fort, but we have a special guest helping us. And would you like to introduce yourself, Mr. Special Guest?
Yeah, hi guys, my name's Ulrich. I'm a second year medical student at the University of Queensland. Today I'm going to be doing a podcast for about 30 minutes. Does that sound okay with you guys? We'll discuss some topics and
Yep, that sounds
Yep.
perfect.
yeah, okay, I got informed consent.
Yeah,
ready to go.
very nice. Put the spiel down. Very cool.
Okay, so in the podcast today, we're just going to be asking you a couple of questions and we'll just be wanting to get some answers from you. Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds great, bro.
Yeah, if you feel uncomfortable at any moment, just say the word and we'll pivot to something else, okay?
Okay, sure.
Sounds good. Okay, so first question, easy one, right? Like, how'd you get into the UQ medical school in the first place? Like, tell us a bit about yourself.
So I was born on December 9th, 2001. That was a Sunday, about 6 a.m. Via cesarean section. Fast forward like 15 odd years, or 16, something like that. Took the UMAT exam. So that got me in from high school entry. Did 4 years of philosophy. Now I'm here.
Very nice.
It's good to hear. Brendan and I took similar pathways, but we actually did the UCAT. So I do recall my older brother also taking the UMAT in the past, and I think it was in paper form, right?
It was all paper form. Yeah, I'm kind of a old man by comparison to you guys. But with age comes wisdom and experience.
That's true, which is why we're seeking your wisdom today.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, what have you found interesting about medicine so far?
I suppose it's sort of it probably what anyone finds interesting about medical school probably depends a lot on what their background actually is. But for me, coming from, the old ivory tower of philosophy, right? All I was really doing in my undergrad was like attending some tutorials, and writing a lot of essays. And so I guess sort of being quite hands-on is a big change of pace for me. Especially with the change in year two of getting much more clinical time than I was getting in year one of MD.
Oh. So you said a lot more clinical time. As in, I feel like at least I'm not super sure about what we're going to be doing in year two. So could you elaborate a bit on that?
We can elaborate on this one. So, of course, your mileage may vary because I'm kind of the guinea pig for the program you'll be getting. But
Thank you
more
very
or less,
much.
half.
Yeah. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries, fellas. More or less, the first half of the year for me was doing some outpatient and allied health placements. So personally, I'm at QE2 hospital down sort of Salisbury Coopers Plains area. That was like 2 4-hour sessions per week, on very fast rotations, right? Like obviously being second year, pretty amateurish still, all things considered. So it was very much just sort of getting a feel for like what's actually the scope of activities that takes place at a hospital, right?
Yeah.
And sort of getting to meet some of like the like allied health kind of practitioners that you never really get much of a chance to sort of get like sort of directly immersed in later on once you're sort of getting into like the nitty-gritty of like medical things, right? And then in the second half of the year, what I'm doing now is a GP placement. I've got that down in Logan Lee, so outside the Brisbane City Council area. That's a big 8-hour day on Fridays. Sit in with the consults there. Good fun.
8 hours. Wow.
But so basically, it's an 8 hours of clinical time for most of the year. There's also like one other little class I've got at the moment, which is called like clinical coaching. That's basically the replacement for H&E.
Oh,
Oh, health and examination. Okay.
History and examination, right?
Sorry.
yeah.
Yep. History and examination.
It happens,
I
man.
I wasn't gonna correct him. I mean, I was like, oh, okay, we'll let it slide. But
But yeah, so probably overall like 8 hours a week you would count on, give or take a little bit. Which is of course enormously more than first year, but still very much building up to years 3 and 4, which are traditionally the sort of, out of the classroom, into actual practice kind of years.
yeah, that's reassuring because, like, at least in year one, I feel like so much of our study is a lot of theory and a lot of like practice on our peers instead of like actual patients. So it's good that we'll be, getting a little bit of a taste of the real clinical world in year two. So that's good.
Yeah, also to build on that, I think that there's the huge difference between being on campus 5 days a week and going out to the hospitals once a month to practice clinical skills. And then, as you're saying, like as a year two, you're being thrust into the clinics from what I'm hearing. So, like, just to confirm, did you say that you were in the QE2 hospital for the first half of the year, and then you moved to like the clinics in the second half of the year?
So I'm effectively, for most of my stuff, I've got CSBL or CBL, which is what I get instead of TBL, right?
Yep.
So like most of my classes basically, except for like a day of lectures at St. Lucia, are down at QE2. But of course, like, that'll vary for different people depending on learning community. And most people in the South learning community that I'm part of are taking it at PA. But so in practice, that's like where most of my classes are. But you sort of get shuffled all around the place. I go to MATA sometimes for Obs Gyn, go to PA for PSW, so it's pretty sort of all around the place. And then for my GP stuff, that's down way whoop whoop down south.
Is it hard getting to all these places?
Well, look, I live in the CBD and I don't have a car,
Oh,
but being in the CBD, I just kept in mind that I had to sort of preference along the train and bus routes, and in the end, I got something that's like very far away geographically, but Gold Coast Express train, nice narrow gauge rail gets me there in about 45 minutes, no worries.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. So you talked about preferencing. Is this for the learning communities, or is there an additional preferencing you do to choose your locations to study at?
And there's a lot of preferencing, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're in your learning community. I think for the most part that'll stay the same in year two. You'll preference your timetables at the start of the year,
Okay.
oh,
and part of that will be which particular hospital you might be at. So for South, probably 90% are at PA, 10% are at QE2. I forgot to do my preferences, so that's you can imagine that's why I ended up where I am. But then sort of you'll get other things along the way. Like we've just done our preferencing for years 3 and 4 learning communities. So and of course we did our GP preferencing as well.
oh.
Can you give us any hints of what the year 3 and 4 preferencing are about, or do you want to keep the
I mean, all they really, it might actually be different for you guys, but all they particularly said is just you're going somewhere for the next 2 years, choose wisely, and with that I decided to dump myself into Toowoomba, so could
Oh.
be interesting.
Yeah, good luck out there.
We'll do our best.
But that does sound pretty daunting, like being handed that decision, even if you're not like super familiar with the benefits of the places that you're going to go.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose a lot of people sort of have. I think it does tend to get overthought to some extent. I know of people who like are sort of like, oh, I really want to do like ortho or something, which is a bit of quite a statement to make as like a second year med student, and so they like want to get sent to the West learning community because Ipswich Hospital has a reputation for being like pretty good and pretty like big at ortho. But realistically, I think it's just like you just pick a place that you can get to, and that's sort of the main objective of the whole thing.
I guess that's a pretty good tip for us in second year, like preference to places that you can get to easily.
The train lines, that's the
Yeah.
strat.
But do you have any other
Yeah,
tips?
I love the any other tips? I mean, like, I think second year is a bit of a change from first year in the way that you probably end up running into like more things on a regular basis that are like quite sort of arcane. So for example, in first year you won't actually get much exposure uh to sort of stuff beyond like the structured classroom environment, right?
Yeah.
For example, throughout first year, with the possible exception of your OSCE, you're probably not actually gonna witness like a pathological finding, right?
Unless it's a
Whereas
cadaver.
like,
Half, I guess.
yeah, but I feel like there's the slight caveat of they're not living things anymore.
Mm.
And so I think like with second year, you will just sort of it's just like less structured in the way of like you rock up to the hospital one day and you see like an interesting case, you see an interesting procedure that you weren't fully anticipating. I suppose it's being ready to learn from those things on the fly, even though you don't know that like, oh, I've got a class on this coming up this week, let me do the reading in advance.
So just being like open to just learning at any point, even if it's something that you've never encountered before. And
Yeah, I would advise just sort of being open to things, and I guess the biggest tool that helps you is sort of those real like fundamentals that you do in first year, right? Like what's probably not as important is like knowing sort of your exact like having like a perfect memory of like your pathology slides from first year, but maybe sort of more like like obviously it pays dividends down the road, but in terms of continuing like a learning trajectory, I'd say like be good at just sort of the very like bare bones, like what are the fundamentals of history and exam, for example. Do your hand hygiene properly, that kind of thing. Because once you have those bits in a position where you don't have to like worry about them from then on, then it's sort of second nature, and you can just go in and be ready to learn more novel things if you're not quite as bothered about fundamentals.
oh, that's interesting. So you're saying that like H&E skills like history and examination, history taking are like a lot more important than memorizing like anatomy and pathology for second year.
Well, maybe not like, well, because I suppose there's fundamental skills like all across the sort of like spectrum of what you might call like medical knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So I suppose like if we were just talking about like strictly like a pathology domain, right? It would be less sort of what's like the exact like gene that gets involved with this condition, and more sort of along the lines of thinking very practically, what are like the red flags you're looking for on every consult or something like that, right? Because that's the sort of thing that it's the sort of thing that like defines your everyday experience more than the sort of like really like niche kind of things, which is definitely still good to know, but maybe like not the sort of most important stuff to get up and online while still as like just a medical student.
Okay, I see. So just like solid foundation.
Yeah. Leave the wacky stuff to the consultants. Obviously, you want to build up along to that, but it's not the kind of stuff that you'll be leveraging in like the near term.
That does make a lot of sense, yeah. Having the applicable skills more early on, and then you can build up your knowledge base in the meantime.
Yeah. Is there anything that you've seen out in the hospitals and like places that you've been having placements at that's confronting, or like, I don't know, something that you didn't expect?
I don't know about like not expect, but confronting, for sure. I think that it's hard to speak for like the experiences of, medical students in Brisbane as a sort of single organism, but I do think that for the most part, medical students tend to come from like, broadly speaking, like, stable, middle upper sort of socioeconomic background families. But the reality is, in the medical system, especially in the public healthcare system, right, that you get basically an overrepresentation of the third and fourth quartiles. Which is just to say that I think you need to. God, how do I'm trying to sort of say this in like a. Because I don't want to just say like, oh, you have to be willing to like empathize with people who are most likely coming from quite different backgrounds to you. Because I think that like the idea that you sort of like empathize across like some sort of otherwise like delineating barrier between you two is sort of like not the point in the first place. Because the idea is that that barrier shouldn't really be there. And so I think it's you'll end up talking to patients who, for example, like simply like do not have the means to access the medical system in certain ways that you might just take as kind of like second nature, like like go to your dentist. But if that doesn't get paid for, then obviously sort of not an option. And so I think it's often pretty important just to get into like the mindset of like, as a medical practitioner, what's actually like, what means do you have to give benefits or to like reduce the difficulties of the people you encounter, irrespective of whatever circumstance they find themselves in. And sometimes that can be quite difficult, right? Like, let's say you're working in a GP clinic, whether you're on place, obviously if you're on placement, you're mostly just watching, but we imagine a world where we're a GP in 10 years time. We have 10 minutes, a patient comes in, maybe not our regular patient, maybe they don't have a regular GP. They come in, plenty of comorbidities, right? You have a very short consult. There's only so much you can sort of realistically do to help someone. And so at that point, if you sort of start going down the pipeline of like, oh, like, we got to do like XYZ because we're in like ideal medical textbook world, you probably sort of end up, I guess, not delivering sort of what has to be the most sort of important or like crucial things to sort of get arranged like in a timely manner. Whereas like, you sort of say like, okay, you come in, we can't do everything now. Here's what we can do. Here's what, also works in your circumstances, right? I suppose it's just to bring like a very long rambling thing back around to the idea of like what's sort of confronting. I suppose it's the idea of having to reconcile realistic practice with what you sort of, with the world that lives in like textbooks and PowerPoint slides.
Yeah. It sounds like the intersection between medicine and the business sides of things. That's what I'm getting from here. Like, there's that mismatch that people experience and what is optimal healthcare.
Yeah, like I think it's definitely the textbook idea of healthcare is to some extent like an ideal that you aspire to, but whether you're like able to actually like deliver that consistently to like real complicated patients who frankly have a life outside of going to your consults is like another thing altogether. And I think you just have to sort of be in the mindset of like I guess just sort of be in the mindset of like maximizing what you can do, but also knowing that I suppose it's never going to be necessarily as much as you would hope to be able to achieve. Because if there wasn't like big, hard problems to solve in people's lives, as regards healthcare in the first place, then there wouldn't be a need for you to have a job.
Very true.
Guess we only exist because diseases exist. But no, those are some very interesting points. It's kind of like going from, I think me and Raymond went to a networking night like yesterday, right?
Yeah.
And it was called like I remember one of the doctors made a point similar to that. It's like in like you have like a zone of control that extends. It might extend like really far, really wide, or maybe only like a small area, right? Maybe just your clinic as a GP, and
Your team.
yeah, or your team, right? And it's only in that area that you're able to do change, right? Like you're saying, Howard. Um, and outside of that, you don't have control. Like the patient like lives their own life outside of your consult. They do their own things. They make their own decisions. They have responsibilities and people that they have to care for, right? And I think it's fine. It's like I guess we'll have to confront the fact that we can't fix everything like, of our patients like optimally in the time that we have, because frankly, like it's not possible, and we just have to strive for that ideal.
Yeah, and given like obviously if you're in like a private practice neurosurgery thing, you'll have more resources available, but in any circumstance, what you'll be able to give to people is limited by, the money that the health system has to sort of give you to work with, your patient circumstances, and then in just your own time, your team's time. And so it's all like a compromise. And I think I don't want to say get ready to be disappointed in certain regards, but I suppose like it's just once you get out of the sort of classroom bubble, it's when you start encountering these real sort of complexities, these real difficulties. Uh, it's definitely like interesting, it's definitely rewarding, but it's also, I suppose, the biggest change coming out of like the purely sort of classroom end of medical school.
Get ready to be disappointed.
Is that the lesson to take away?
Well, look, like talking about medicine more broadly, I think a lot of people, it's definitely like a stereotype in Australia, at least, that a lot of people go into like medicine with sort of like, lifelong aspirations of having been like groomed towards it as like a vocation, mum and dad are doctors, they tell me to study, and I've decided I'm going to be a doctor as well from like age 10, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's something to be wary of is like this idea of sort of being like entitled towards certain things, like I want to be a doctor, I want to be able to like accomplish XYZ, fix all these cases in my patients, I want to aim for this subspecialty, so on and so forth. When realistically I think it can be dangerous to view it as like such a vocation in that regard. I think that it can be useful to take a step back and just go like, okay, the way this works is that I'm here to, to the best of my ability, maximize certain benefits, towards the people under my care in society. And of course, in exchange, you get pretty well compensated for it. And I think like once you just view it like that, as in like, you're playing with like essentially taxpayer dollars, and your job is to make them go as far as you can, and they certainly won't fix everything. But I think once you have that sort of outlook, it helps you realize that you have like genuine responsibilities towards people in society, as opposed to it sort of being like a manifest destiny kind of thing, as I become the top paid private neurosurgeon in Australia.
I guess I'm gonna get prepared for that reality.
Sorry, I feel like I put it on a bit of a downer. What's your guys' favorite vegetable?
Oh, favorite vegetable? You can go first, right? Oh, no, you drink
Oh, carrots.
carrots. You like carrots? Okay.
Why? Are you surprised?
Like I would say tomato, but that's a fruit.
It is a fruit.
Yeah. Favorite vegetable? I like fennel actually. Fennel.
I have no idea what that is.
I know fennel from like the seeds as opposed to like the leafy green thing.
Really? You guys should try it sometime. It's like nice to just like kind of like what's the closest thing that I can say? Kind of like celery, but more less crispy, if you know what I mean. More like well-rounded. Feel like a bite to it.
Interesting.
And it has a nice like little aftertaste in the back. Like when you eat fennel seeds, there's that little bit of
No. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. It's just one of the. I think it's one of the best vegetables. Just like eat raw, you know, just like snack on, you know.
You are the only person I've ever heard talk about eating raw fennel, but I'm sure it's very healthy, so
Uh,
that's good.
yeah. Okay. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Where does that fit in the food pyramid? Where does it fit in the Australian dietary health lines?
It's a vegetable. If it's in the vegetable bin or the food pyramid,
Well, what about the seeds? Like, where would that
oh,
be?
that's true. I mean, I don't think it would be a legume. I think it's nuts and seeds. Maybe it would be a legume.
I have no idea.
Oh, anyway. But moving on. Oh, yes. You did talk about your 4 years of undergrad as philosophy. Doing philosophy as a degree, right? Alright.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Do you think it's like prepared you for these experiences in second year?
Well, I guess it's all a give and take because I definitely went into first year not knowing particularly well how like a cell works, for example.
Oh, so
Um,
true.
were you guys both more or less biomed students in your undergrads?
Yep.
Yeah. But I didn't do biology before, so I think my foundation is kind of like.
Wait, what?
But before doing my biomed degree.
Oh, interesting. That makes one of us then. Let's continue the story anyway.
Okay, so I became very wise, of course, and my main interest in philosophy was ethics, um, as opposed to like the sort of very like abstract end of it. And so I was always interested, I suppose, in in how in how things come back to impact on society and on individuals. Um, and I guess in that sense, it sort of does give me like a good sort of like a good sense of perspective and being able to hopefully appreciate the significance of things that we do in the medical world, even if maybe it didn't prepare me as explicitly for understanding what medicine might actually involve on sort of like a more microscopic level.
That makes sense.
But I feel like everyone comes into medicine with like quite sort of different backgrounds of experiences. Even if you're like, probably over half of students are in effect biomed students. But even within that, you'll definitely sort of like just by virtue of the fact that medicine is something that doesn't just take place like in labs and in papers, right? Because it's a thing that happens in real life between different people. I think you will get a lot of individuality coming in from everyone involved in that, from patients, allied health, medical practitioners, what have you. It's then, I guess, um, being able to recognize what you're good at and also what other people are good at is sort of, going back to like whatever teamwork idea you want to talk about, right? That's how you actually like get the most out of the people you're working with.
Yeah. Good to see like the themes of medicine that we've been learning about, like was it
Lifelong
with
learning.
teamwork?
Yeah, so like putting it
Things
into
like
the context of like a second year class, for example, when I go to clinical coaching, which is more or less go around the wards, do some history and exam on like real patients, right? There's a couple of us sort of involved in that, and we have like a sort of idea, like a shared sort of mental model between us of, who's confident doing this part, who's confident, listening to try and like, find this thing with the stethoscope, who can like, ask the questions in a way to just sort of narrow down what, like on the history point of view, and so on and so forth. And so even though we're all like pretty useless individually, none of us are remotely qualified to be doctors yet. Uh, working together, we can sort of first of all apply our strengths um, into a sort of like Voltron type situation.
That sounds cooler than it has any right to. But that actually reminds me, like yesterday, like I'm going back to the networking night again, but it really surprised me how interconnected. Because we talked with the respiratory specialist and a
Radiology.
Radiologists, and
Yep.
it seems like their careers were so connected with each other's. Like they all knew different people that they would refer to. Like, oh yeah, Trevor loves doing like interstitial lung disease, but I like doing pulmonary hypertension, so I get all those cases. And Michelle really likes doing neuro cases specifically within radiology. So I think having all these like little niches that people have and how they keep like track of them, it's pretty cool to see. It sounds like you're doing something similar.
It's like a good sort of idea to have in the back of your mind that medicine in Australia is like, we're not a huge country compared to like, let's say the US. And so medicine here is very small and incestuous. But on account of that, you do get to leverage like certain like benefits from that in the sense that, if you're familiar with who else is practicing, not just in your local area, but like let's say in sort of southeast Queensland, right? That then gives you, like if you could refer patients, for example, in quite sort of deliberate and conscious ways, as opposed to just sort of going like, oh, who's my nearest radiologist? Because I'm in like some huge mega city, as opposed to lovely little provincial Brisbane.
That's interesting. It's like the where you practice influences like how you think and
Yeah,
what
but also
people
don't make too many enemies, because
Oh,
the yeah.
I guess like going from, as you said, like a mega city to Brisbane, and then you could go from like Brisbane to an even more rural area where resources are more limited and the community is even more tight knit. Like that relationship still holds up, and it's probably reflected even more strongly. Like thinking about that.
I think Brisbane is like a good size in the sense that like Queensland Health, we could say. Because you'll sort of you on one hand you do get the breadth and depth of expertise,
Yeah.
especially down in southeast Queensland. But simultaneously you do have like a lot of your sort of consultants knowing each other, for example, or like your GPs knowing sort of specifically who in the sort of like city council area is good and interested in doing certain types of cases. It's a whole different sort of situation when you're out in the wilderness, as they might say, because at that point, whether you actually have a nearly as much of a team to rely on in the first place is not guaranteed. In which case you might have to, the rural sort of locations have a reputation for sort of making you do like Superman kind of medicine, where you're like sort of you're every specialist rolled into one. And at that point, obviously you still have like, the ability to like refer, but whether you're doing that all the time, who knows?